The price of a woman. The rain had not stopped for 3 days. It drummed against the windows of Hale Manor like a persistent truth no one wished to hear. Inside, the parlor smelled of damp wool and ink. A fire smoldered low in the grate, struggling against the chill. Elara Wynn stood beside the window, fingers resting on the cold glass. Beyond it, the carriages blurred in silver haze. She was not invited to sit. Her husband had not looked at her since dawn. Across the room, Rowan Hale leaned over a ledger, his voice calm and measured as he spoke to the trader across from him. Old Maeve, a woman with sharp eyes and a shawl the color of ash. Their words were low, almost ceremonial, as if sealing a pact. "Consider it a fair exchange," Rowan murmured, turning the page with deliberate care. "You'll see she's more trouble than worth. But perhaps the man in the north has use for a companion." Maeve's gaze flicked toward Elara, a brief, assessing look, not unkind, merely tired. "A cabin waits. A man who speaks little. He pays in silence, not coin." Elara did not move. Her throat burned with words she would not speak. She had spoken too many times before, apologies, pleas, quiet protests, all dissolved like breath on glass. Rowan's voice cut through her thoughts, smooth as a blade. "It is settled, then?" The ledger closed with a soft thud. That sound, not thunder, not shouts, marked the end of her marriage. When Maeve rose, she gestured toward the door. "We leave before nightfall." Elara turned once more toward her husband. His profile was sharp, untouched by remorse. He was already pouring himself a drink. She wondered, absurdly, whether he would miss her voice echoing in the halls. Perhaps the other woman, the one whose perfume lingered on his collar, would fill the silence easily. She gathered her shawl from the chair, the one she had embroidered years ago with his initials. The fabric trembled in her hands. For a moment, she pressed it to her chest, not out of love, but out of memory. "Rowan," she whispered. He didn't look up. "Go." The word was simple, final. Outside, the air smelled of rain and horse sweat. The carriage waited, black and narrow, wheels sunk slightly in mud. Maeve climbed in first, her movements efficient, practiced. Elara followed, her skirts heavy with damp. The door shut with a hollow click. The driver cracked the reins, and the manor began to fade behind a curtain of rain. For a long while, neither woman spoke. The forest thickened around them, trees rising like dark sentinels. The road narrowed, winding upward into mist. Maeve finally broke the silence. "You know where we go?" Elara shook her head. "North," Maeve said softly, "past the timberline, to the man who lives beyond the pines. He asked for no one. Yet when I told him of you, he did not refuse." "Why me?" Elara's voice was barely a breath. Maeve studied her hands, rough with years of trade and toil. "Perhaps he knows what it means to lose something that can't be replaced." Elara turned her face toward the window. The rain had become snow. Each flake clung briefly before vanishing, delicate, doomed. She tried to imagine this man, this silent mountain dweller who would take her in as one might take in a stray. A man who lived far from voices, far from betrayal. Perhaps silence could be a kindness. Hours passed. The rhythm of the wheels lulled her into fragments of thought. She remembered her wedding day. White lace, sunlight, Rowan's hand over hers. She remembered the laughter of guests, the taste of promise. Then the shadows that followed. His absences, the whispers, the broken promises disguised as charm. Love had become a debt, and she the payment. As the sky dimmed into violet dusk, Maeve reached into her satchel and drew out a small tin cup of tea. She handed it over without a word. The steam rose in fragile ribbons, carrying the scent of pine and bitterness. "Rest," Maeve said. "Tomorrow, you begin again." Elara almost smiled. "And what will I be tomorrow?" Maeve's eyes softened, though her voice remained steady. "Alive. That will be enough." The carriage climbed higher. Outside, the world was stripped of color, only white snow and black trees. Elara leaned her head against the glass, her reflection faint and unfamiliar. The rain had ended. The past, too, seemed to dissolve somewhere between the sound of hooves and the hush of falling snow. In that stillness, for the first time in years, she felt something fragile stir beneath the ruins of her heart. Not hope, not yet, but a question. If a man who lived in silence could accept a woman the world had discarded, perhaps there were names beyond worthless. The mountains waited ahead, cold and wide, holding their secrets close. Elara closed her eyes as the carriage vanished into the mist, her old life fading behind her, and the unknown drawing near. The man beyond the pines. The first sight of the mountains struck Elara like a hell breath. They rose from a mist, immense, solemn, their peaks veiled in snow. The carriage wheels cracked over frost-hardened mud as the forest swallowed the last trace of civilization. By dawn, the road had narrowed into a single trail flanked by pines. The driver halted where the earth curved upward into rock and silence. "No farther," he muttered, lifting her small trunk down from the cart. Maeve stepped out beside her. "You walk from here," she said gently. "He'll meet us by the ridge." Elara looked around. No smoke, no sound but wind threading through branches. "Does he know I'm coming?" Maeve's lips curved, not into a smile, but into something like resignation. "He knows enough." They began to climb. Snow creaked beneath their boots, and cold air stung her lungs. The silence was heavy, alive with the hum of unseen things. Alara's skirts caught on twigs. The scent of pine sap clung to her sleeves. When they reached the ridge, he was waiting. Silas Thorne stood beside a gray horse, his figure broad against the white expanse. His coat was thick with fur, his beard dark, his expression unreadable. He did not speak as Maeve approached. His eyes flicked to Elara, steady and assessing. Maeve broke the silence first. "This is the woman." He nodded once. "She's to stay through winter," Maeve continued. "After that," he raised a gloved hand. "No need," his voice low, rough with disuse. The sound startled Elara more than the cold. It wasn't unkind, only final. Maeve turned to her. "He'll take care of you, in his way. You'll earn your keep. That's all that's asked." Elara tried to thank her, but the words caught. When she turned, the traitor was already walking back down the trail, her figure soon swallowed by the snow. Then there was only the mountain man. He took her trunk with ease, slinging it over one shoulder, and motioned toward the path ahead. They walked in silence, the snow deepening with every step. Birds watched from the trees. Somewhere, water murmured under ice. The cabin appeared suddenly, hidden in a hollow between two ridges. Smoke curled faintly from the chimney, a single sign of life in the white wilderness. Inside, warmth struck her face, the scent of pine logs, stew, leather. The room was small but orderly. A single table, 2 chairs, a hearth, a shelf lined with tools and jars. Everything bore the marks of a man who built rather than bought. Silas set her trunk near the wall and stepped aside. "You can use that bed," he said, gesturing toward a narrow cot by the window. "Water's in the basin. Wood's by the door." His words were simple, practical. He did not meet her eyes again. She nodded, clutching her shawl tighter. "Thank you." He grunted something that might have been acknowledgement and moved to the hearth, stirring the fire. The flames painted his face in amber, strong lines, tired eyes. He looked like a man carved from the same wood that built the walls. As she unpacked a few things, the silence stretched. She felt the weight of it pressing against her, yet there was no malice in it, only space. Later, when she lit the oil lamp, he set a bowl of stew before her. She hesitated, then tasted it. It was simple, heavy with herbs. "You cook?" she asked softly. He shrugged. "Enough to eat." She looked around. No sign of another's presence. "You live alone?" He paused, then nodded once. "Used to be 2. The fire cracked." He didn't elaborate, and she didn't ask. Grief, she thought, has its own language of quiet. That night, as snow whispered against the window, she lay awake listening to the wind. Across the room, Silas moved quietly, banking the fire, removing his boots, the slow rhythm of a man accustomed to solitude. In the faint glow, she watched his shadow pass against the wall. He was a stranger, yet his silence carried something familiar, the same kind of stillness she had lived with, though his was chosen. not forced. When he finally sat by the fire, his head bowed, she realized he wasn't ignoring her. He was simply at peace in a world without words. The difference unsettled her. Sleep came late. In her dreams, the manner returned, laughter, perfume. Rowan's smile as he turned away. But when she woke, it was to the smell of pine smoke and the crackle of fire. Silas was already outside, chopping wood. Through the frost-blurred glass, she watched him move, precise, steady, each motion purposeful. No wasted energy, no anger. Elara pressed her palm against the cold window pane. The world beyond it was harsh, yet honest. It asked nothing from her she could not give. For the first time in years, no one called her name. And somehow, that absence felt like freedom. She turned back to the cabin, small and silent but alive. The air smelled of new bread and cold morning. A single thought lingered as she drew her shawl tighter. If silence could be kind, perhaps she could learn its language. Outside, the mountains waited, vast, watching, as if they knew what neither of them yet dared to say. The sound of his silence. Winter loosened its grip slowly, as though reluctant to leave the mountain. The snow retreated in silver ribbons, revealing the dark, damp earth beneath. The cabin's roof dripped with meltwater. The sound became the rhythm of their days. Elara had learned the pattern of this quiet life. At dawn, Silas would disappear into the woods, returning with chopped logs or game slung over his shoulder. She tended the hearth, kneaded bread, mended worn fabric. They rarely spoke, not from discomfort, but from an unspoken understanding that silence could hold more truth than words ever could. In those long, quiet hours, she began to study him the way one studies weather, patient, observant, cautious. The way his eyes softened when he fed the horses. The faint scar that ran from his jaw to his collarbone. The reverence with which he handled his tools, as though each piece carried a story. He was not a cruel man, she realized. Only one who had chosen to live where pain could not find him. Some evenings, when the wind howled down the valley, he would sit by the fire carving wood in his small, shapeless forms. Elara would read from an old book Maeve had left behind, a worn collection of poetry whose spine cracked with age. Her voice filled the room gently, brushing against the sound of crackling flame. Silas never asked her to stop. Sometimes she thought she saw something flicker behind his eyes, a memory, a shadow, something too tender to name. One night, as thunder rolled through the mountains, Elara woke to the sound of the cabin door creaking. A gust of wind swept through, scattering ash from the hearth. Silas was already there, securing the latch against the storm. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the valley for an instant. Elara flinched. The light, sharp, white, merciless, brought back echoes of another storm, another night, when Rowan's voice had filled the air with fury instead of thunder. Her breath caught. Silas turned, his gaze landing on her. No questions, no words, only quiet recognition. He crossed the room, movements deliberate, careful, as though approaching a wounded animal. Without asking, he drew a blanket from the chair and placed it around her shoulders. His hand brushed her arm briefly, not a claim, but an offering. Storms are louder up here, he murmured, voice low. They pass fast. It was the longest sentence he had spoken to her since she'd arrived. She nodded, unable to reply. The warmth of his hand lingered even after he stepped away. When the thunder faded, he sat beside her by the hearth. They watched the fire together, its glow soft against the rough edges of their faces. Outside, rain whispered against the roof. Inside, the silence was no longer empty. She found herself speaking, quietly, carefully, as if the words might break between them. He used to shout during storms. I thought the sky echoed him. Silas didn't look at her. His gaze remained fixed on the flames. Then you've heard enough shouting for a lifetime. Something inside her fractured, not from pain, but from release. She hadn't realized how heavy her memories were until they began to lift, piece by piece, into the air between them. They sat that way for a long time. Two people bound by silence, staring at the same fire, feeling it burn away what words never could. Days passed. The world softened. Spring painted the hills in pale green, and birds returned to the forest. Elara found laughter again, hesitant at first, then freer, like water finding its course. Once, while washing clothes by the stream, she caught Silas watching her. Not in the way Rowan once had, possessive, assessing, but quietly, as though seeing her without trying to own what he saw. When their eyes met, neither looked away. That night, she couldn't sleep. The cabin felt too small, her heartbeat too loud. She rose, walked to the window, and found him outside splitting wood by moonlight. His movements were steady, the rhythm echoing the pulse in her chest. He looked up. The axe paused midair. Their eyes met again, and in that stillness, something wordless passed between them. She stepped outside, barefoot in the cool grass. The moon painted everything in silver. Neither spoke. When she reached him, he set the axe aside. The scent of pine and smoke surrounded them. "I don't know what this is," she said quietly. He shook his head once. "You don't have to." The space between them shrank. Not from touch, but from recognition. The kind that burns quietly, where loneliness ends and something dangerous begins. Elara looked at him, truly looked, at the man who had said almost nothing and yet had given her more peace than all the vows Rowan ever spoke. "You should rest," he said finally, voice rough. She nodded but didn't move. The silence that followed was heavy with the truth neither dared name. When she returned inside, she could still feel the warmth of his nearness clinging to her skin like the scent of smoke. She sat by the window until dawn, watching the mountains fade into light. For the first time in years, she didn't dream of escape. She dreamed of staying. The price of love. By the time summer touched the mountains, Elara had almost forgotten what it felt like to flinch at her own name. The days unfolded in quiet rhythm, bread rising, river flowing, Silas working beside her in the fields. The cabin had begun to feel like a heartbeat, steady, alive theirs. Yet peace, she knew, was never left untested. It came one morning in the shape of a stranger on horseback, a man cloaked in the colors of the lowlands, bearing a seal she recognized before she even saw the wax. The crest of Rowan Hale. Silas noticed the way her hands stilled over the wash basin. He didn't ask, only stood behind her, his presence solid and grounding. The messenger dismounted and handed her the letter without greeting. "From your husband," he said curtly. "He demands your return." The word husband landed like a stone in her chest. She turned the envelope over. The handwriting was elegant, familiar, sharp, the same that once wrote love notes on her wedding night, and later, contracts that sold her away. Silas spoke first, quiet but steady. "You don't owe him anything." Elara swallowed. "Legally, I do." He didn't answer. His silence carried an unspoken truth. Laws made by men like Rowan had never protected women like her. She broke the seal. The words inside were cold, businesslike. "The arrangement has been reconsidered. Return at once, lest I send for you." No apology. No question. Only ownership. Elara folded the letter carefully, set it on the table, and stared at it for a long time. The silence between her and Silas stretched, brittle and charged. "Do you want to go back?" he asked finally. She looked at him, the man who had given her nothing but quiet, and somehow, everything she had ever needed. "I don't know what I want," she whispered. "Only what I can't bear." He waited. "I can't bear to belong to anyone again." Something flickered in his eyes. Not relief, not joy, but understanding. He stepped closer, hands rough, gentle. "Then stay. Not as mine. Just stay." Her breath trembled. "You would risk what peace you've built for me." He shook his head slowly. "Peace means nothing if it asks you to live half alive." The weight of his words settled deep. For the first time, she felt the truth of them not as comfort but as a choice. That night, she burned the letter in the hearth. The flames devoured it eagerly, curling the paper into black fragments that drifted upward like released ghosts. She watched until only ash remained. The next morning, she packed a small satchel, not to flee, but to decide on her own terms. Silas waited by the door, eyes shadowed with something that looked like restraint. "I have to face him," she said. Not to return, but to end it. He nodded once. I'll go with you. The journey down the mountain was long and wordless. By dusk, they reached the edge of the trading post where Maeve still kept her stall. The older woman looked up in surprise when she saw Elara, then glanced at Silas and understood without a word. Inside the inn, Rowan waited, immaculate as ever, his smile polished, his arrogance untouched by time. Elara, he said smoothly, as though greeting a guest, not the woman he'd sold. You look well. She stood straight, hands steady. I am. His eyes flicked to Silas. This woodsman, he thinks he can keep what's mine. Silas didn't move. She's not something to keep. Rowan's smirk faltered. You forget yourself. Elara stepped forward, her voice low but unwavering. No, I remember too well. You sold me, Rowan. You traded me like a debt you didn't wish to carry. And now that you see I've found peace, you call it theft. His expression darkened. You're my wife by law. Then let the law chase ghosts, she said. Because the woman you married is gone. Silence filled the room, thick, final. Rowan's jaw tightened, but something in her gaze, quiet, unshaken, made him step back. You'll regret this, he hissed. Elara almost smiled. I already did. Once. She turned, leaving him with his pride and his papers. Outside, the air tasted of rain and freedom. Silas waited beside the horses, watching her with the same calm that had steadied her since that first day on the ridge. It's done, she said simply. He nodded. Then let's go home. The word home struck her with unexpected tenderness. Not a place of ownership, but of choice. As they rode back into the forest, night gathered around them. Vast, quiet, forgiving. When they reached the cabin, Elara walked to the door and pressed her palm against the wood. The grain was rough beneath her skin, real and grounding. Slowly, she took the carving knife from the shelf and etched a single word into the frame. Beloved. Silas watched from a distance, understanding without needing to ask. She turned toward him, her voice soft but steady. You gave me no promises, Silas. Only peace. And that was more than love ever gave me before. He stepped closer, his silence answering for him. The wind rose gently through the pines, carrying away the last traces of her old name, her old life. Elara looked toward the horizon, the world she had once been sold by, now far behind her, and finally breathed without fear. The mountain, once cold and merciless, now held her story in its quiet heart. And in that silence, she was not worthless, not owned, but reborn and beloved.